The knocking started before dawn. 3 heavy pounds on the front door, then 4 more. A pause, then a fifth. Martha Sloane didn't startle. She'd been sitting upright on the edge of her cot, fully dressed, her boots laced tight, her coat already on. She'd heard them walking across the frozen ground outside, boots crunching through the crusted snow. 4 pairs, maybe 5. The voices had murmured low, hushed with doubt, but one of them had a sharpness in it, accusing, impatient. She pulled the latch and opened the cabin door. It was Clem Harrow at the front, the schoolteacher's boy behind him, and 2 of the Braddock brothers flanking either side. The 5th man, Jeb from the sawmill, hovered in back, nervously clutching his hat like it might keep his hands warm. Martha met their eyes one by one. "We seen the smoke," Clem said, pointing toward the thin ribbon that curled up from her chimney. "Town's out. Wind knocked most every stack flat last night. You?" His voice hesitated. "You got firewood?" Martha didn't answer. Not right away. Her face was hard, wind-chapped, and streaked faintly with soot. She stood there quiet in the doorway of her one-room cabin, shoulders squared, eyes steady, waiting just long enough for Clem to shift in place before speaking. "No," she said flatly. "Not in the shed." Clem frowned, and the boy behind him leaned forward to speak. "But you've still got some? Just a little, maybe?" "No," Martha repeated. "Not in the shed." Then she stepped aside. None of the men moved. They stood outside like confused children, dumb in the face of what they couldn't see. Their own sheds had toppled. Firewood had rolled and scattered, buried in ice or soaked from the sleet that had come down sideways all night. The blizzard hadn't hit full, but the warning was clear. Every house in the valley would freeze in a matter of days if the wind didn't let up, and all they could think of was why the chimney from Martha Sloane's house was smoking steady while theirs lay cold. Clem looked past her, peering into the cabin. He saw no pile beside the hearth, no stack of logs, no cord of split pine, no axe leaning in the corner, no kindling basket, just a faint orange glow behind the bricked-up stove, and 2 children asleep beneath quilts on the floor, warm enough their noses weren't red. "Where?" Clem asked, voice low now. Martha turned, stepped back inside, and motioned, "Follow." They'd mocked her when she built the shed, not openly, not cruelly, but with the kind of smiles that neighbors give when they believe they know better. She'd hauled timbers on her back from the creek herself, refused help, dug a trench down through the hard prairie behind her cabin, layered stone by hand, then built the shed walls up over the entrance like it was just another shelter, ordinary and thin. "She's got no stack," the Braddock brothers had laughed. "No firewood in it either. Just makes a show." But Martha hadn't argued, not when they passed by, not when they joked about her empty woodshed. She'd simply locked it with a scrap of chain and kept her mouth shut, all through the summer, all through the fall, even when the rains washed out half the trail to town, while others were chopping and stacking openly. She worked at night, quiet, underground, and now, when Clem followed her through the back door, down behind the cabin, and across the slick frozen earth, he saw it for the first time. The woodshed's door hung ajar. The inside was indeed empty. No firewood in sight, just a dirt floor and the faint smell of earth. But Martha knelt and brushed aside a patch of old cloth, revealing a square cutout in the floor, a trap door. With one grunt she lifted it open, and the cold hit them like a slap. Not the kind that burned, but the kind that meant absence. Absence of heat, absence of waste. It was dry, bone dry, and down there, stacked wall to wall beneath the earth, layered with sawdust and sealed in oilcloth, was cord after cord of split wood. Hundreds of pounds, dozens of weeks' worth. Clem just stood there, stunned. "You kept it underground?" "I did." "You sealed it?" "I did." Silence. Martha turned back toward her cabin. "I've got 2 children," she said, without pride or apology. "You'll take 3 armfuls, no more." The story of Martha's woodshed spread faster than any winter wind. By nightfall, 7 more men had come, then 3 women. All told the same story: sheds cracked, stacks blown down, wood soaked and frozen into useless grey bricks. The sleet had gotten under every roofline, and now the cold bit deeper than any of them remembered. The children in town were coughing. One boy had blackened toes. The oldest woman, the one with no kin, hadn't come out of her house in 2 days. When they knocked, there was no sound, yet Martha's cabin still smoked. Inside, the air was warm enough for breath not to show. Her children played cards by the hearth. And though the stove's fire was small, just a few pieces burning at once, the warmth lasted for hours because the wood hadn't lost a drop to weather. She hadn't wasted a log. By the 3rd day, a line formed behind her cabin, and the questions began. "How'd she get the idea?" someone muttered. "Is it a mine shaft?" Another whispered. "Why didn't we do this?" A third said angrily. The talk turned sour quickly. Some said she'd hoarded, others said she'd cheated, stolen lumber meant for the church fence, but none of it stuck. The wood had Martha's markings on it, split and sealed with a cut none of the men used, a wedge mark that slanted left, hers alone. The truth was simple. She'd planned, and no one had thought to ask why. But it wasn't just foresight that kept Martha awake that night. It was footsteps, more than before. She watched from the darkened cabin as 5 figures crossed her field. No torches, no knocks, just slow movement like they were counting the steps. She tightened her coat, kept the children in the back corner, and held the rifle without loading it yet. There was a sound at the shed, metal on wood, a latch moving, then a curse. Martha stepped outside. "I gave you what I could," she said into the dark. The 5 figures froze. "You take more. You're stealing from my children. You freeze their beds for your own comfort." A long pause. Then the boy, Mr. Thomas's boy, barely 16, stepped forward, head low. "It's for my mother," he said. She's not waking up." Martha stared, then pointed to the wheelbarrow near the coop. "One load," she said. "You come again, and it's not me you answer to. It's God." The others didn't move. But the boy did, took the barrow, filled it slow, didn't look up. When he left, Martha sealed the trap again and laid a fresh board across the shed floor. She didn't sleep. The next morning she found footprints in the snow near her front door, and one glove, a man's glove, heavy, worn. She didn't recognize it. The glove stayed on her windowsill for 2 days. Martha didn't touch it. She just let it sit there, crusted in frost by morning and dripping slush by late afternoon, as the winter storm began to deepen its hold on the valley. Whoever left it hadn't come back, not yet, but she knew the look of the thing. Frayed cuff, burn scar along one side, patches stitched on with wire thread. It was millwork gear, not Clem, not Thomas's boy. This was someone older, someone who'd watched her, maybe even helped mock her the summer she built the shed. And now they were circling in the cold, desperate. The valley was cracking, not loud, not dramatic, but like glass under slow pressure. People were splitting. Some drew close, pooling resources, knocking politely on neighbors' doors. Others grew secretive, vanishing into their cabins with quiet suspicion in their eyes. The snowfall wasn't yet as deep as the worst years, but the temperature had dropped to 15 below and held there for 4 days straight. Chickens were freezing in coops, water buckets turned solid in under an hour, and the path to town was now fully blocked by snowdrifts, trapping every settler in the basin for the foreseeable future, which meant word about Martha's firewood had stopped being rumor. It was now legend. 2 cabins burned down the next night. The first was an accident, folks said. Mr. Avery had poured kerosene too close to the hearth, trying to light frozen kindling. He was blind in one eye and shaking bad from the cold. Nobody blamed him. The second fire, though, that one was whispered about. The Braddock's east wall had gone up in a sudden flare around midnight, and by the time anyone came running, the boys were already outside barefoot in the snow, cursing and accusing each other of throwing wet logs that hissed and sparked. But there was another detail. They'd been burning pine, green pine, wood that never should have been in their stack. Martha watched from her window as the second fire died down. She could see their breath in the moonlight as they argued. She didn't open her door, didn't offer anything. She'd given what she could, and her own stack was growing low. Underground, yes, still sealed and dry, but lower. She counted it carefully each morning. She burned only what was needed, half a log at dawn, half more at dusk. The stove was efficient, bricked up with a clay-sealed tunnel system that let the heat snake through the wall before rising. It kept her children warm even when the fire died, but it couldn't last forever, and she knew now they would come again, not asking, taking. On the 6th night, the wind turned violent, the kind of howling gusts that shook shutters and forced smoke back down into stovepipes. Martha was patching the cabin's back corner, old linen stuffed into a new crack, when she heard the sound again. Bootsteps, not across the yard this time, on the roof. She froze, then moved silently to the hearth, grabbed the iron rod from beside the stove, and stood motionless, eyes scanning the ceiling. Then, thud, snow falling from a boot, another step, then silence. Whoever it was had misjudged how loud a rooftop might be when every breath of air was frozen still. She didn't wait. Martha threw open the door and stepped out, wind slashing across her face, snow clawing at her coat. And there he was, a man in his 40s, maybe 50s, crouched low beside the chimney with a burlap sack in one hand and a length of rope in the other. He was trying to drop the sack down her stovepipe, hoping to clog the smoke, choke the fire, and force her out. She screamed, not words, just sound, raw and sharp, like a mother wolf. He jerked upright in surprise and slipped. His boots slid off the edge of the pitched roof, and he tumbled. He hit the snow hard, groaning, cursing, and then scrambled to his feet and ran. The burlap sack lay half in the drift, full of snow and wet hay, a sabotage bundle. He hadn't come to steal, he'd come to extinguish, to destroy. Martha didn't chase. She knew better than to fight a cornered man in the dark. But her voice followed him. "If I find you near again, "I'll bury you myself," she screamed into the wind. She meant it. The next morning, the children helped her seal the stovepipe tighter. She hadn't told them what the man had tried, but they knew something had gone wrong. They worked silently, packing clay, shifting stones, brushing snow from the roof with bundled branches. When they came down, the older child, Sarah, age 9, looked up at her mother with a question on her lips. "Are we safe?" Martha didn't answer at first. She just pulled her daughter close and pressed her gloved hand to the back of the child's head. "We're warm," she said finally. Sarah nodded, and Martha turned to the shed again. It was time to make a decision. By nightfall, she'd dug out the second tunnel. Not deep, not wide, just enough. She'd planned it in summer, but hadn't finished. It ran from the floor beneath the shed toward the old root cellar behind the coop. A crawl space, really. She'd kept carrots and parsnips there before. Now she shoveled them aside and began laying logs. Just a few, stacked low and tight behind a hidden panel of wood. Not for others, for her children, for if the shed was ever breached, because it would be. She could feel it. The glove on her windowsill was gone by morning. The attack came not as violence, but something worse. Disappearance. Martha stepped out that day to find the shed door open and swinging. The lock chain had been snapped. Bolt cutters or pried metal, she couldn't tell, but it was open. The cloth cover was gone. The trap door wide open, and beneath, empty, every log gone. Not scattered, not dropped in haste, removed, carefully. Every piece had been hauled out during the night without a sound. She dropped to her knees and stared into the pit, the dry sawdust still undisturbed except where prints led toward the rear wall. Prints too small for boots, socks maybe, gloves. Someone had come knowing exactly what was down there. Someone who knew the trap's location, the quantity, and the hours it would take to remove it quietly. Not just one man, a team, likely half the town. They had waited, watched, plotted, and they'd taken it all. She didn't cry. She walked slowly back to her cabin and lit the stove with a scrap of branch. The children noticed the look in her eyes and didn't speak. Martha packed their bags. They'd use the hidden tunnel next. That night she lit one last fire in the stove, not to warm them, but to mislead. They wouldn't see her leave. Through the root cellar, crawling, dragging her daughter and son behind her, she emerged through a brush-covered hole near the dry creek bed. She didn't go to town. She didn't go to neighbors. She walked them up toward the ridgeline, to an old hunting cabin her husband had built years before, half collapsed but sheltered by rock and covered in deep snow. She braced the inside, sealed the door, and started a fire with the first log from the emergency stack she'd hidden there back in September. 3 days later, as the storm worsened, a rider from town came up the trail looking for her. He found the cabin cold, the stove dead, the floor clean, the trapdoor open and empty. He assumed she'd frozen. He went back and told the others, and the town shook their heads and said, "We should have helped. We should have given back some of what we took." But no one came looking again. They thought she was dead, and that suited Martha Sloane just fine. The wind clawed at the stone hut like it meant to tear the mountain down. Martha Sloane sat in the corner of the hunting cabin, her back against the cold wall, arms wrapped around both her children, and listened to the shriek of the blizzard outside. The walls weren't thick, just stacked stone and old mortar, but the structure was dug half into the hillside and snow had blanketed the roof thick enough to act like a second skin. It was quieter inside than it had any right to be, warmer too. The old stove her husband had installed was still intact. She'd sealed the chimney low and let the heat crawl through the stones rather than waste it up into the wind. The wood burned slow here, smoked less, even with just a few sticks. The warmth built up hour by hour, not like the town's cabins, square-built and drafty, with smoke pouring into the sky like a signal fire. Out here, no one could see her. No one could take from her again. The snow didn't stop for 6 more days. In that time, Martha rationed everything. 2 slices of salted pork each day, carrot broth, boiled parsnips when they could be warmed. The children didn't complain. They huddled close to their mother, played card games with fingerless gloves, and helped her split the smallest of the remaining firewood into kindling. It was work, but not frantic work. They weren't starving, not yet, not freezing. The cave cabin kept them safe. It was everything the woodshed hadn't been. It was hidden, it was quiet, and it was theirs alone. Back in town, the mood darkened. The theft of Martha's wood had gone sour fast. No one admitted to it, not openly, but those who'd taken from her began to argue among themselves. At first they shared it, fairly even. The Braddock boys passed a quarter cord to the Avery place. Clem handed half a wheelbarrow to Thomas's family. But by the second day, the sharing stopped. The stacks ran low. The bitterness began. Some claimed they'd been cheated, that someone had taken more than their share, that the wood had gone missing in the night, even after the theft. Then the fighting began. Small things, fists, shouting. One man knocked his neighbor down with a shovel over a pile of bark scraps. Then another cabin caught fire, and this time it was no accident. Sarah asked about the town on the 8th day. "Are they cold?" she whispered as she and her brother curled against their mother in the half-dark. Martha didn't answer right away. Then gently, "Yes." "Will they freeze?" Martha looked at the wall. Frost curled in the corners of the stones. "Some might." Sarah didn't speak again that night. She just held her brother tighter and fell asleep beneath the blankets they'd carried with them through the tunnel. Martha stayed awake, watching the fire's glow rise and fall behind the iron grate. Her fingers ached from the cold, but her jaw was locked tighter than any door. She had warned them, given them wood, set limits, and they had taken everything anyway. 2 days later, she heard the dogs, not close but echoing, carried on the wind like a broken trumpet. She rose slowly and stepped outside the hidden entryway. The door was sealed with brush and snow, but she could pry it from within. She did now, cautiously, lifting the cover and peering out. The wind was light, the snow still thick, and the valley below was fogged white, but the sound was clear. A bark, a yelp, then silence, then another bark, sharp and high. Sled dogs. No one in the valley had dogs trained for sleds. Not anymore. Not since the old trapper passed last spring, which meant someone had come in from outside. It took her 2 hours to climb down far enough to see. She didn't take the children. She left them with strict instructions, and armed her daughter with a loaded pistol, and made her way through the old game trails toward the overlook that gave view of the valley. There, below, just past the first bend in the frozen creek, she saw it, a sleigh, not a proper dog sled, but a rough wood rig pulled by 3 mutts and a half-starved mule inching forward with the weight of a single man driving it. He had a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf around his face. His eyes were squinting toward town, and behind him, a coffin. Martha's breath caught. Not just a coffin, a child-sized one. The man was a circuit preacher. She recognized the shape of his rig. He traveled once every few months to tend to outlying folk, say a few words, take offerings, but he hadn't come in months. No one expected him back through the storm, yet here he was, hauling wood and death together. She watched as he stopped near the first house on the trail, watched as people emerged, watched the way they cried, then watched the dogs turn again and head toward the next home. It was the kind of ritual she'd seen during the worst years, when sickness came in winter and took the smallest first. But this time it wasn't flu, it wasn't fever, it was cold, it was hunger, and it was guilt. When she returned to the cabin, Sarah asked, "Are we going back?" Martha shook her head. "Not yet," the girl nodded. "Because of the firewood?" "No," Martha said, "because of the coffin." But they couldn't stay forever. By the 12th day, the last of the wood from the emergency stash was nearly gone. They had enough for another 3 nights if she rationed strictly. But the children were losing weight, their cheeks hollowing, even in warmth. Their energy drained. The food had lasted but wouldn't last much longer. Snowmelt was fine for water, but the broth was thin, the pork nearly gone, and the hidden garden buried deep. Martha knew what she had to do. She would go back, just her, at night, not to the town, but to the shed. She had one more tunnel they didn't know about. She left after sundown, wrapped tight in furs, armed with the hunting rifle and a small sled. She moved slow, under cover, following the deer tracks and the shadows of the trees. The snow groaned beneath her, but not enough to give her away. Not now. Most of the valley slept, but her breath still came shallow. She didn't trust them, not anymore. The shed looked untouched from a distance. The door was closed again, locked even. Someone had repaired the chain, but the trapdoor, she knew, would be hollow. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and lit the lantern with a flick of steel. The floorboards were just as she'd left them, dry, swept, too clean. But something was off. A smell, not rot, not mold, ash. She dropped to her knees and pulled up the trapdoor. There were no logs, only a burnt cloth bundle and the charred remains of someone's boot, half melted. Someone had burned part of the underground chamber, maybe by accident, maybe trying to keep warm. But the fire hadn't caught. The space was too cold, too closed in. The rest of the chamber, empty, scorched. And then she saw it, etched into the wood above the ash pile. 3 words. "We were wrong." Martha stood there for a long time, then turned and climbed back up. She didn't touch the remains, didn't cry, didn't scream. She just took what was left, a hatchet from the corner, a few strips of dried meat from the loft where no one had looked, and sealed the shed door behind her. Outside, the wind picked up. The valley was quiet, and above, the stars glinted like ice chips in a black sea. When Martha crested the ridge with the old sled in tow, the storm had faded to a brittle hush, the kind of silence that presses against the ears and makes every step feel too loud. The stars above were brilliant, cold blue and white, scattered over the black like frost crystals on a window pane. She moved fast, tired and shaking, but steady, no longer watching the valley like she once had, no longer curious about who might be watching back. She already knew, and the answer didn't matter now. She had what she came for, a hatchet, a scrap of dried meat, a few forgotten cloths, and nothing else. The town had taken everything, even its own. It wasn't until she reached the old hunting trail again, just a half-mile from the cave cabin, that she saw the second set of tracks. Boots, men's boots, not from her, not from her children, fresh. She crouched immediately, lantern shuttered, heart pounding like a drum. The tracks were shallow, just a dusting of snow in them, at most an hour old, and they led up the same trail she was following, toward the cabin. Her stomach dropped. She ran. The run became a blur, branches slashing at her arms, her lungs burning cold with each breath. The sled banged behind her as she hauled it over a narrow log bridge and up the final slope. The fire in her thighs was nothing compared to the dread rising in her throat. She dropped the sled outside and pulled her rifle free. The door to the cave cabin was closed, but the snow in front of it had been disturbed. She didn't shout, didn't warn. She just crept to the side, used the stone ledge to brace her elbow, and kicked the door open with the butt of her boot. Inside, two figures turned in the dark. One was Sarah, the other was Clem Harrow. He was holding a blanket, his face pale, sunken, and his hands lifted instantly, empty. Wait, I didn't touch them. I swear, I didn't even light the fire. Martha didn't lower the rifle. Where's Jacob? She asked, voice hollow. Here, a voice piped up from behind the stove. Her boy, hiding, but alive. I didn't know it was yours, Clem said weakly, still on his knees. Didn't know you were up here. I saw smoke last night from the ridge and followed it. Thought maybe it was the trapper's place. I didn't mean harm. Ma, I didn't take a thing. Martha's breath came slow, controlled, but her finger never left the trigger. You came alone? I did. You followed the smoke? He nodded. Then why did I see two sets of boots? Clem's eyes widened. I came alone. I swear And then a sound, outside, crunch. Someone stepped on the sled. Martha didn't hesitate. She turned and fired. The blast echoed through the trees like thunder, a single shot tearing the night. Then silence. Then, don't shoot, a voice cried from the dark. Don't, please, we're not here to hurt. A figure stepped forward, arms raised. It was Mrs. Avery, wrapped in a man's coat, lips blue, one eye swollen shut. I followed him, she said. Didn't know where he was going, but I figured if Clem was heading anywhere, it meant warmth. She was sobbing now. I didn't mean to frighten your girl. I swear. I got no more wood. I ain't got anything left. Behind her came another, Thomas's boy, barely walking, then two more, the Braddock twins, gaunt, silent, and behind them, half the town. They were sick, not all from illness, some from starvation, others from cold. One carried a baby bundled in layers so thick you couldn't see if it breathed. Another had bandages wrapped around both feet, frost-bitten black beneath. They didn't speak as they approached. They just looked and waited. Martha turned to her daughter. Let your brother out. The little boy crawled from behind the stove. His face lit up when he saw his mother standing tall with the rifle still warm. But his eyes didn't leave the people outside. He knew, he remembered. And his sister, Sarah, took his hand and held it like she wasn't letting go again. Martha stepped out onto the ridge, faced the crowd. You stole from me, she said, not loud, not accusing, just the truth. No one denied it. You came in the dark. You took what you wanted, and you left nothing. One man looked down, another began to cry. You waited until I was gone. You burned what I saved, and now you want what little I have left. Clem stepped forward. We came to ask. Ask, Martha said, now that the snow's too deep to run, now that you're empty and cold, now that you've buried children. Silence. Then Mrs. Avery said, voice breaking, we came to ask forgiveness. Martha turned away, walked back into the cabin. She looked at her children, looked at the half-full crate of emergency wood behind the wall, looked at the stew pot simmering gently on the stove. Then she stepped back outside. You'll dig. They looked up. All of you, you'll dig a new tunnel, deep, wide. You'll haul stone. You'll line it with brick if you can. You'll seal it proper. You'll build a place for every cabin in this valley to store beneath the frost line. You'll learn what I learned. They nodded. And you won't eat from my pot. More nodding. You won't burn my logs. Even Clem nodded. Martha stared at them one by one, then said, but you can stay the night. Just one. We'll keep the fire burning. After that, you work. That night, 31 people slept in and around the little cave cabin. Martha rationed everything. Small bites of stew, one log at a time, thick quilts and careful turns near the stove. No one complained, no one stole, no one whispered. And when morning came, The frost had deepened to 25 below, but the cabin stayed warm. They buried another child that day and dug their first communal root cellar that afternoon. By spring, they'd built 5 underground vaults, each one dug by hand, each lined in stone, each sealed with clay and sloped against the melt. Martha watched them work from the ridge sometimes, arms crossed, her children sitting beside her. The town didn't look the same anymore. Where once it had been scattered cabins and half-built barns, there was now movement, people walking from house to house without suspicion, hauling tools, sharing sleds, teaching each other how to build below, not above. The freeze had broken more than ice. It had cracked their pride. The first vault belonged to no one, a communal store. By May, it was already half full with split pine and alder, sealed in oilcloth the way Martha had taught them. No one asked her to lead, they just followed. The tunnel entrances were disguised under sheds and coops, some built into hillsides, others covered in tarps and snowmelt runoffs. Children began helping, stacking kindling, rolling barrels of sawdust, but not a soul mocked anymore. Not when they saw how long her own cabin had stayed warm without needing to burn through stacks. Not when they realized she'd never wasted a single log on show. And not when they saw the marker. It was Sarah's idea, a small wooden post carved with shaking hands, driven into the earth beside what used to be the original shed. We were wrong. Martha didn't ask who had written the words in ash, but she left it standing. That summer, when the preacher returned for real, he brought paper and ink, and he brought someone else, a government man with wire-rimmed glasses, and a ledger so thick he could barely lift it. They wanted to record the events, the death toll, the names of the children, the ones who froze, the ones who didn't. They asked Martha to speak. She refused, but Sarah did. She told them what her mother had done, about the wood hidden underground, the trap door, the sabotage, the retreat into the ridge, the strangers who came to their door in the night. She said to never forget, Sarah told them, voice even and low. Never forget what it took to keep one cabin warm, and never forget what cold does to a heart if you let it. The preacher nodded. The government man just wrote. Years later, a visitor would arrive in the valley asking for the fire tunnels. It had become something of a legend by then. They'd heard about the woman who stored all her firewood underground, who outlasted a freeze that took half the state by surprise, who taught a valley to bury its pride and build warmth from dirt and stone. They'd say her name was Martha Sloan, and the locals would nod, but they wouldn't say more, just point toward the hill where the post still stood. Sarah took over the cabin after her mother passed. She was 16 by then, strong, even-voiced, with the same squared jaw and no-nonsense tone. She kept the clay stove going, and taught her own children how to split logs with a leftward wedge, just like her mother had shown. One winter, long after the town had rebuilt, her youngest found the old trapdoor in what remained of the first woodshed. "Mama," he said, "why'd she hide it?" Sarah stood over the open pit and looked down at the dusty earth below. No logs now, just a few empty cloths and a rusted saw. "Because no one believed her." The boy didn't answer, just nodded, then asked, "Will they believe me if I do something different?" Sarah looked at him a long time. "Only after you survive the storm." By the end of that decade, every home in the valley had a woodshed, but not one of them stood above ground. They all looked empty until you knew where to dig, until you saw what lay beneath and what was saved.